Welcome to California Highways Route by Route. This podcast explores everything about the numbered highways in California, from Route 8 along the coast to US 395 along the Sierras, from Route 8 in the south to Route 139 in the north.
Brought to you by the California Highways webpage in Gribble Nation.
I'm Daniel Fagan. I do the California Highways webpage at www.cahighways.org.
I'm Tom Fear. I'm one of four admins on GribbleNation.org. If you are reading something about the southwest corner of the United States, more than likely that is me writing about it.
This is episode 2.07, Route 1-ish, the Golden Gate Bridge, and we'll explain the ish in a minute. I will note this mention does mention suicide because they've been constructing a suicide barrier on Route 101. When we get to the projects, if you're sensitive to that, you may want to skip a little bit.
In the last episode, so far this season, we've been exploring California highways route by route with Route 1. We've discussed the first federal road between Cumberland, Maryland, and the Ohio River, which is now U.S. Route 40. The exploration of what is Route 1 in other states. The first state highway, the Lake Tahoe Wagon Road, which became U.S. Route 50. The first legislative route, LRN 1, which is now US 101 from San Francisco to Kansas City. Sign Route 1, now Route 1 between Norfolk Gaviota to US 101 near Fortuna. We saw that the 1964 state highway renumbering lengthened Route 1 with the addition of former sign Route 3, former US Route 101A, LRN 60 from San Juan Capistrano to Ventura. We then discussed the history of Route 1, working from the southern end. We started in Orange County and have gone through all the counties up the coast all the way to San Francisco. For each, we've discussed the history within the various cities, the plans for the freeway routings, the names used for the highway, plans and projects along the highway. As a reminder, our discussions build upon the background we built in the first season of the podcast, where we discussed the history of the system, which serves to explain the eras of state highways and what we mean when we talk about legislative route numbers. The numbering approach to state highways, which explains how the route numbers were chosen and why. The names of the state highways and how they were chosen. The organizations involved in the state highway system. If you want to catch up on any past episode, we encourage you to go to our Spotify for Podcasters home at anchor.fm/CA Route by Route or our forever home at caroutebyroute.org and listen to our backlog of episodes.
In this episode, we have a digression, a discontinuity in both Route 1 and US 101. That's pretty famous. You might have heard of it. I don't know. Our focus today is the Golden Gate Bridge, which is not part of any state route. We'll cover what was there before the bridge, the construction of the bridge, the operation of the bridge, and interesting projects occurring on the bridge. I'll also mention, I'll put it in the show notes, there's a really good documentary on the History Channel that explores the competition between the building of the Golden Gate Bridge and the Oakland Bay Bridge. One was built separately, one was built by the Division of Highways, and they sort of were seeing who would get done first. This season's going to have 10 episodes on Route 1 and 2 on Route 2, and the next episode will bring us back to Route 1, as we'll cover the portion of Route 1 north of the bridge from Marin all the way to the Redwoods. As a reminder, talking about post-1964 Route 1, it has multiple segments defined. Segment A, Route 5 south of San Juan Capistrano to Route 101 near El Rio, except for the portion of Route 1 relinquished in Dana Point, Newport Beach, Santa Monica, and Oxnard, with authorization to relinquish in Los Angeles south of Santa Monica and at one time in Torrance. We covered this in the first episode on Orange County, the second episode on LA County, and part of it in the third episode on Santa Barbara and Ventura County. Segment B from Route 101 at Emmawood State Beach, 1.3 miles north of Route 33 to Route 101, 2.8 miles south of the Ventura-Santa Barbara County line at the Mobile Pier undercrossing. This was in Episode 3, Santa Barbara and Ventura County. Segment C from Route 101 near Las Cruces to Route 101 in Pismo Beach via the vicinity of Lompoc, Vandenberg Space Force Base in Guadalupe, with authorization to relinquish in Pismo Beach. We covered this again in Episode 3 for the portion in Santa Barbara County and in Episode 2.04 for the portion in San Luis Obispo County. Segment D from Route 101 in San Luis Obispo to Route 280 south of San Francisco along the coast via Cambria, San Simeon, and Santa Cruz. This was covered in 3 episodes. It was the episode on San Luis Obispo and Big Sur, the episode on Monterey and Santa Cruz, and the episode that covered Pacifica and San Francisco. Segment E, Route 280 near the south boundary of the city and county of San Francisco to Route 101 near the approach to the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. That was covered in our last episode that talked about Route 1 in Pacifica and San Francisco. And Segment F, from Route 101 near the southerly end of the Marin Peninsula to Route 101 near Leggett, near the coast route through Jenner and Westport. This segment focuses on the portion between segments E and F, which is a discontinuity in US 101 as well. And when we talk about LRNs, you'll see this discontinuity. It's the distinction between LRN 1 and LRN 2. One's north of the bridge, one south of the bridge.
Prior to construction of the Golden Gate Bridge, traffic wishing to continue north from San Francisco to Marin County had to utilize the Hyde Street Pier. Hyde Street Pier opened in 1922 and was purpose-built to receive car ferries coming from Sausalito Point. Hyde Street Pier was part of the original alignment of U.S. Route 101 when the U.S. route system was created in 1926 and was the starting point of the Redwood Highway, which is otherwise known as LRN 1. When Sign Route 1 was commissioned during 1934, it had a sign routing through the city of San Francisco to Hyde Street Pier. Route 1 northbound entered the city of San Francisco via Junipero Serra Boulevard, or LRN 56. Route 1 merged into 19th Avenue via the 19th Avenue extension towards Golden Gate Park on what was part of LRN 56. Route 1 intersected Sign Route 5, which is now Sign Route 35, on 19th Avenue at Sloat Boulevard. Route 1 entered Golden Gate Park via 19th Avenue, where state maintenance terminated at Lincoln Way. Route 1 traversed the local roads of Golden Gate Park around the western and northern shore of Stowe Lake, Fulton Street. Route 1 is shown to have a planned bypass of Stowe Lake, which would have followed the southern and eastern shores to a planned new alignment via Funston Avenue. Planned Funston Avenue alignment of Route 1 is shown traversing the Presidio to the Golden Gate Bridge construction site. Route 1 continued east via Fulton Street to the City Hall complex at Franklin Street. Route 1 passed the City Hall complex via Franklin Street and McAllister Street to reach US 101, LRN 2, at Van Ness Avenue. Route 1 followed a multiplex of US Route 101 via Van Ness Avenue, Bay Street, and Hyde Street to the Hyde Street Pier.
Before we talk about the lead up to the bridge, I want to talk about the other end of this, because I seem to remember where the Golden Gate terminates on the Marin side, there really was nothing. And the Hyde Street ferry went across to Sausalito, and I seem to remember you did a blog recently, Tom, on, I want to say it was Route 193, I could be remembering wrong, in Sausalito, and I'm curious whether that road, that old routing, was the continuation of 101 before they built the Golden Gate.
It was actually several years ago, and I wrote that, but yes, there was an established routing of Route 101 in Sausalito right from the outset of the U.S. route system.
Now, that was probably before the LRNs were established, so it does not necessarily show up in the LRN numbers, and it probably doesn't even show up in the definitions because it was generalized as from Marin, too.
Yeah, so the only really solid map I've seen showing that alignment is the 1935 Division of Highways survey map of Marin County, which those are all on David Rumsey. If you search California Division of Highways, you'll find these fairly easily. These maps, even though they're dated to 1935, are based off 1934 route surveys. So like all the solid line maps are what was state highways at the time.
Now, were these routes then later adopted, even if they became minor routes, into the state highway system? As I said, I seem to remember a sign route in that area that went to Sausalito looking like it went to the point where the pier would have been.
I think you're thinking of Route 131, and I don't believe that was the same routing off the top of my head.
Okay, that may be what I was thinking of, but I just remember it went through Sausalito right to the edge of the bay.
Yeah, that was actually a bridge concept for that would have gone across San Francisco Bay. I want to say it is on your site, a picture of the conceptual bridge, but it never really got very far. But that's like one of a great many of proposed bridges over San Francisco Bay, which never really got more or less off the ground as far as the drawing stage.
Yeah, I've got some of them on the southern crossing, which I put with, I want to say it's with Route 380, just for lack of a better place to put it. And I might have these other bridge pictures with Route 131. I don't recall, but they're there. But it just came into my head, and since we were talking about where this ended up on the San Francisco side, it made sense to talk about the other side. So, do you want to continue talking about the Golden Gate Bridge?
So just as a quick aside, I'm going to mention the Golden Gate Bridge is not part of Route 101, but I'm going to clarify is per state maintenance because it is in the AASHTO log. This part is US 101.
So it's part of Route 101 in terms of AASHTO. It is not part of Route 101 by the definitions of the legislature.
Correct. So this part is going to be a little complicated to explain. The Golden Gate Bridge is not part of this, what the state defines as legislative Route 101, or what most people would know as US Route 101. However, it is defined in the AASHTO log as part of US Route 101. There's an important distinction there. The Golden Gate Bridge is not a state highway. That's what gets people hung up on this quite a bit, but it is part of US Route 101 according to AASHTO.
But it is not signed as part of US 101 by the state.
Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's even part of. I've seen photos of actually even Route 1 signed on the bridge. I know for a fact Route 1 is not signed on the bridge in any recent time. But like I have a photo on Gribble Nation. I want to say it was like in the early 1960s. You could see the white Route 1 spade on the Golden Gate Bridge next to a US Route 101 spade or shield.
I wonder whether that shield goes back to the Auto Club signing thing.
Probably. Very, 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 very likely. The design was, I don't even think it was the solid white shield. I believe it was a bear shield, which would have been an Auto Club placement, the CSAA specifically.
Right. We talk about that in season 1, where we talk about the highway number signing of the state highways. And it's also in the chronology episode.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. AASHTO doesn't really have requirements that U.S. routes need to be maintained by a state Department of Transportation. It's their preference, and they'll often reject applications for additions for highways that don't, but it's not a steadfast rule that they've always followed.
Are there other examples you can think of?
Well, I mean, you have several like signed in historically, like in national parks, a lot of like toll structures, especially if they predated like the 1940s. That was like a really, really big one that AASHTO started having a problem with in the late 1930s, was private toll crossings being part of the U.S. route system. A lot of these things are grandfathered in rather than being, like I was saying, if like a state was to petition AASHTO now and wanted like a private road or bridge, a ferry added to the system, more than likely they would be rejected by the executive committee. So the Golden Gate Bridge is maintained by the Golden Gate Bridge Highway and Transportation District. This gap dates back to the original gap in state highway maintenance between LRN1, the Redwood Highway, and LRN2, El Camino Real. This gap originally included the city of San Francisco, as state highways prior to 1933 did not traverse cities. However, the U.S. highway designation did, and US 101 did include San Francisco starting from the High Street Pier. As we just mentioned, US 101 also included the ferry from Sausalito to Hyde Street Pier.
And right now, there's only one ferry left in the state highway system.
2, actually.
2. Well, aren't they both on the same route?
No, one's Route 84 and one's Route 220. Ryer Island and the JMAC. Yeah, everyone forgets about 220. That's the one that's kind of reliable. That's that old cable ferry, the JMAC.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah.
The operative word. It's more reliable than the Ryer Island ferry.
Yeah.
In January 1933, construction of the Golden Gate Bridge began, followed by construction of the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge in July. This, combined with the extension of the state highways into the cities, led US 101 to be extended through San Francisco from the pier and to include a diversion to the Bay Bridge, where US 101E split off and went down the east side of the bay, with US 101 West following the original alignment on the western side of San Francisco Bay. Additionally, In 1933, LRN 56, which became Route 1, was extended into San Francisco, although it did not cross the bay.
And we see this in the legislative route numbers, with legislative route 5 being the US 101E on the other side of the bridge.
Yes. Parts of south of Hayward were even part of US 48 originally. And that's a whole weird story that we can get sidetracked into, but
we'll get into it next season when we talk about I-5W.
Yes. The Golden Gate Bridge was completed on April 19th, 1937. It was dedicated on May 28th. Unlike the state-built San Francisco Oakland Bay Bridge, construction of the Golden Gate Bridge was financed by 6 counties of San Francisco Bay and was not a state facility. The Golden Gate Bridge featured a almost 9,000-foot long hybrid truss suspension design. Despite not being a state highway, US 101 was aligned across the bridge per AASHTO document. Even if there was not state maintenance, the exclusion continued with the 1964 renumbering, where the definition for a new Route 101, again, this is US 101, excluded the bridge. So it kind of gets into what we were talking to above. It is part of AASHTO's definition of US Route 101, but it's not the state's.
So let's talk about the construction of the bridge. The concept that would eventually become the Golden Gate Bridge first appeared in a 1916 San Francisco Bulletin article written by former engineering student James Wilkins. The Golden Gate Bridge and Highway District, now the Golden Gate Bridge Highway and Transportation District, was authorized by the state legislature in 1928 as the official entity that would construct and finance the Golden Gate Bridge. Following the Wall Street crash of 1929, the district lobbied for $30 million in bonds to construct the bridge. Bonds were sold from 1930 to 32, which financed construction. Construction of the Golden Gate Bridge began in January 1933 on the 5th. The bridge was completed on April 19, 1937, and opened to traffic on May 27, 1937.
Since completion of the bridge, Route 1 changed. Initially, Route 1 followed US 101 by Van Ness towards the Golden Gate Bridge. In 1935, the Division of Highways, Golden Gate Bridge, and Highway District along the city of San Francisco entered into negotiations with the U.S. Army to construct the Park Presidio Boulevard through the Presidio to the Golden Gate Bridge. In 1937, the Division of Highways assumed control of the Presidio connector to the Golden Gate Bridge and also took over negotiations with the military. Construction through the Presidio was issued by military permit to the Division of Highways on July 27, 1938. An U.S. Army requirement was for the Presidio project to be fully limited access through the military reservation. Park Presidio Boulevard was completed during April 1940 as the new alignment of Route 1/LRN 56. The new alignment of Route 1 followed 19th Avenue and Park Presidio Boulevard directly north to U.S. Route 101 at the Golden Gate Bridge approach. During 1953 and 1954, the Golden Gate Bridge was retrofitted with diagonal bracing. This change was necessitated due to a windstorm during December 1951, revealing rolling instabilities. If you're familiar with the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, the original structure, which was known as Galloping Urity, this was kind of a more minor version of that, but that was what the concern was, that a similar phenomenon may happen. During 1982 through 1986, the road deck of the Golden Gate Bridge was replaced.
Now, when the Golden Gate Bridge opened during 1937, 50-cent tolls, approximately $10 if you were to factor in inflation in today's numbers, were collected in both travel directions. The toll plaza for the Golden Gate Bridge was always located at the San Francisco end of the structure. Tolls were reduced to 40 cents by 1950 and to 25 cents by 1955. In 1968, tolling shifted to southbound only traffic and tolls were raised to 50 cents. Tolls incrementally raised following the last construction bonds being retired in 1971. You're going to say, the bonds were retired, so why did the tolls go up? Maintenance costs, most likely. Tolls would reach $3 by 1991. Fast-track tolling began during 2002 at a rate of $4. Cash rates were raised to $5. During 2008, fast-track tolling increased to $5 and cash rates increased to $6. During 2011, the Golden Gate Bridge and Highway District voted to remove all toll takers by 2012. This measure was delayed until March 2013 when toll takers were removed. During 2014, fast-track toll rates were raised to $6 and toll-by-plate rates were set at $7. Toll rates would increase by 25 cents annually from 2014 to 2018. During 2019, the Golden Gate Bridge and Highway District approved a plan to increase toll rates by 35 cents annually through 2023. The current fast track rate, or at least I think is the current fast track rate, for a single occupancy vehicle is $8.75, $9 for toll by plate, $9.75 for toll invoice, $6.75 for carpools, and $9.75 for multi-axle vehicle. On the next slide, hopefully, we'll talk about the difference between toll by plate and toll invoice. Tolls today on most highways are paid by fast track. This does not mean there is one fast track. There are 5 separate tolling agencies across the state, and you need to get the transponder from the one you use most. For most, you can set up a deposit account. There are monthly fees for the transponder, and there's a switch to indicate carpooling. We'll put some links on how to find the fast track you need in the show notes. And for some accounts in the Bay Area, you can set up license plates account. And truthfully, I've not crossed the Golden Gate Bridge. I'm not even that familiar with toll bridges because the only one we have in Los Angeles County, where I live, is the Vincent Thomas Bridge, and I think all tolls have been removed from that now. So I'm not familiar with this. License plate accounts, though, if I'm correct, allow you to register your license plate before you go across the bridge and prepay your toll, as opposed to their scanning your license plate and then sending you a bill, which is that invoice. Am I correct on that, Tom?
You are. I actually did that for the first time in 2014 when I drove northbound over the structure.
Yeah, I sort of find the toll bridges intimidating. I could handle the coins. I don't have a transponder, and so I'm always worried, how will they bill me? What happens if I cross the toll without a transponder? Are you familiar with how that works?
I am, because Jessica forgot cash one time before they removed the cash on the Carquinez Bridge. They sent me a $40 bill saying basically don't do it again.
So you really want to try and register your license plate if you think you're going to go across the Golden Bridge. I'd hear they've reduced that amount, but they add like an $8 processing, making the tolls ridiculous still.
Yeah, the thing is, like, it's not a very intuitive system. None of it is fast track anything in the Bay Area for people that are from out of town, and this is really not exclusive to San Francisco Bay. Like, I remember a similar phenomenon in Florida, which if anyone's listening to this podcast, I imagine you're probably a West Coast person, but what I can tell you is Florida loves tolls. They're all over the place, but that makes tolls much more friendly than like how I remember them being like in the 90s or early 2000s, where like you used to get a massive citation like in the mail, like from some Northeast tolling agency because you forgot the right amount of coins.
I always worried me when I was driving back from dropping my daughter off in college in Wisconsin, that both dealing with the tolls going through the Chicago area and going through dealing with the tolls and trying to avoid them going through Oklahoma City, where it's really impossible. And if you're a tourist from out of state, you have no idea what to do and how to pay the tolls or if they'll bill you. It's really confusing. And I mention all of this because for the Golden Gate Bridge, visit www.goldengate.org. You can do a one-time payment there. You can set up a license plate account, or you can get a transponder. You can also pay your violation notices there. So if you're going to go across the Golden Gate Bridge, do that. And the same transponder you use, I believe, works on the Oakland Bay Bridge as well.
It does. And if you're ingenious enough, you can also plan your trip to go over the bridges in a direction where you're not told. So go southbound on the Golden Gate Bridge if you can. That's just a pro tip from me. That I do that quite often.
So who runs the bridge, Tom, if it's not a state highway?
As noted earlier, the Golden Gate Bridge is owned, operated by the Golden Gate Bridge Highway and Transportation District. Said district was approved by the legislature during 1928. The Golden Gate Bridge is not a state-owned highway and never was part of any legislative route. Route 1 traditionally has had signage multiplex on US 101 approaching the structure, along with some historical instances of it actually being signed on the bridge, which we discussed a little bit earlier. In 1969, the Golden Gate Bridge and Highway District became the Golden Gate Bridge, Highway, and Transportation District. This measure was made effective after the district was given responsibility for the Golden Gate Ferry System and Golden Gate Transit System.
Do the ferries still run between the Golden Gate across the bay to Sausalito?
There's pedestrian ferries that run, yeah.
None of the auto ferries are running.
No, they got rid of that a long time ago. The district has 19 members on the board of directors. 9 directors represent San Francisco. 1 is appointed by the mayor. 4 are elected members of the board of supervisors. 4 are non-elected people appointed by the board of supervisors. 4 directors are representatives of Marin County. 2 are elected members of the board of supervisors. 1 is an elected member of the council of mayors and council members and is appointed by the board of supervisors. 1 is a non-elected person appointed by the board of supervisors. 3 directors represent Sonoma County. 1 is an elected member of the board of supervisors. 1 is an elected member of the council of mayors and council members and is appointed by the board of supervisors. 1 is a non-elected person appointed by the board of supervisors. 1 director each represents Napa, Mendocino, and Del Norte counties. Each is a non-elected person appointed by a representative of the board of supervisors. The district is headquartered in San Francisco and has administrative offices in San Rafael. Strange they don't have Humboldt County on there.
The one I was noticing was that they don't have San Mateo County on there.
Yeah, that is strange.
You would think that San Mateo is also equally impacted if it's going to go all the way up to Del Norte.
Yeah.
I guess these are just the folks that helped fund it originally.
It probably is.
And with that, a digression on what are these special districts. If you remember from your, I think it was 8th grade junior high school or middle school education, special districts are this weird thing. It's almost a 4th branch of government. They're created by the legislature, as we saw, but they're independent. They're run by boards that are either elected, as in the case of, think of the equalization districts in California, or they're appointed, as in the case of number of the members of this district, where they're elected to their positions on the board of supervisors, but then they're appointed to this board. They have specific powers defined in the legislation, including, and what's important here, is they can issue bonds for specific purposes to fund things, and we saw that here, they funded construction. They can collect funds to pay off those bonds or for operations, and they have the ability to construct and operate facilities. Some other examples of the districts are the Port Authority in New York, which operates the ports, Mass Pike. It operates the Massachusetts Turnpike and collects tolls on the Turnpike, and they were the district that ended up operating and constructing the Big Dig. And if you listen to the Big Dig podcast that I've recommended, there's a whole episode on the involvement of Mass Pike and the protests that came into play where Western Massachusetts was very upset about funding the Big Dig and the overruns on the Big Dig, and that was due to the Mass Pike district. We see them in cities, very often with rapid transit districts and with Metropolitan Transit Authority districts. Metro in LA is one of these special districts. And you certainly see them with school districts. LA Unified is an example of one of those districts. Contrast this with Caltrans and the Oakland Bay Bridge and the Bay Area Toll Authority, which is run by the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which is responsible for all the state-owned bridges. If I remember correctly, there are 5 of them in that area. It's Oakland and the Benicia Bridge and the Carquinez Bridge, and there are 2 others.
San Rafael, then the one that 92 goes over that I just can't think of the name of.
Yeah, the name just goes out of my head. But that bridge. But those are all special districts, so digression on that. Now we turn our attention to some of the projects that are going on the Golden Gate Bridge. First is the cable repair and repainting project. In March 2011, it was reported the main cables of the Golden Gate Bridge would be renovated for the first time since the span opened in 1937. This isn't a replacement. Cables can't be replaced. It involves chipping off the old paint, vacuuming the chips, and repainting the cables. Exterior paint is what protects the 80,000 miles of wires and cables from corrosion. Keep in mind this is a salt water environment, and it's basically hovering over oceanic water. In November 2016, it was reported that maintenance of the Golden Gate Bridge was lacking. While the main portion of the bridge is regularly repainted, the Golden Gate Bridge's main cables had not been repainted in its entirety since the mid-1930s. Only spot paint. When viewed from the air by helicopter or from the ground, virtually the entire length of the cable housing appears to show wear and tear. Golden Gate Bridge manager Dennis Mulligan explained that the bridge district has
different timeframes to work on different components of the bridge and says the district has based those timeframes on what kinds of repairs and upkeep might be needed. While the outside cable casing might look bad, the 27,000 individual steel strands inside the cable casing have remained pristine. Back in 1969, the district hired an outside consultant engineering firm to walk the bridge. The firm issued a report that recommended the main cable be painted in its entirety as soon as possible. Despite the recommendation, this never happened. The district started the project around 2011, but stopped the painting. Engineers announced the handrails along the main cables needed to be replaced for the safety of bridge painting crews. Even Golden Gate Bridge Board of Directors member Dietrich Stroh has some concerns about the cables in South Tower. Stroh has talked to staff about getting the project going again, but Stroh said that another section of the bridge needed to be treated for rust. We found in exposing some of the substructure that the bracing underneath, which is like crisscrossed behind the riveted piece on there, explained Stroh. It was all rusty. Then there's the money for painting the cable in its entirety. The bridge district has set aside tens of millions of dollars to paint the bridge back in 2011, but Stroh said it was spent on other projects.
Sounds like they've still got a mess with painting those cables. The next project we want to talk about is the suicide barrier, and in researching this, I found a lot of parallels to the Big Dig, which I've mentioned, in terms of the overruns and the costs and so on, and you'll see this as we go through. In July 2010, a Metropolitan Transportation Committee approved $5 million in funding for the design of a suicide barrier on the Golden Gate Bridge. The barrier would cost $45 million, and the Bridge District said it would not spend money on the project, meaning federal, state, or private funding must be found. If it was, they estimated the bridge would take 18 months to install. Remember that number, 18 months. We're not going to see it again. The barrier plan called for a net extending 20 feet below and 20 feet from the side of the span. The net would be made from stainless steel cable, meaning if you landed in it, it would hurt, and would collapse slightly if someone jumped in, making it difficult to get out. The district would buy a snooper truck with an elongated arm to get people out, although such rescues they thought would be rare because the net is expected to act as a deterrent. Roughly 24 people jump from the span each year, and more than 1,300 people have jumped from the span since it opened in 1937. And many of our bridge structures in the state, and I'll mention them later, have this draw to people who are looking to do suicides, unfortunately. And we want to try and stop them. And this was the attempt to do it on the Golden Gate Bridge. In October 2015, the Golden Gate Bridge officials began the process of finding a construction firm to build the landmark $76 million note. That went up from the 45 suicide barrier. So from 2010 to 2015, the cost went from $45 million to $76 million. This only occurred because the Bridge Board approved a deal with the National Park Service to allow builders to store material and equipment on parklands during construction. Why? Well, the Bridge District doesn't own any land. It owns the bridge. When the span was built, it received a permit from what was then known as the U.S. Department of War to build the edges on the bridge. The Park Service is now the federal agency that controls the landings of. In April 2016, work began on the suicide barrier. In April 2016, work on the suicide barrier was delayed yet again. In February 2016, bridge officials reported that there would be a 2-month delay, in part because the original steel selected for the project couldn't be manufactured in large enough quantities in the U.S. Rather than have it made overseas, a different type of steel would have to be used. Because of the steel, other revisions, and the volume of questions, well, the date for opening the bids on construction moved from March to May 2016. But potential bidders continued to have multiple questions that couldn't be answered easily. This opening the bids to 2016. And note that each time you move the opening of the bids, you're delaying the start of construction, which increases costs because everything that you contracted for becomes more expensive. Even with the delay, the promise was that the barrier work would be completed by 2020, as initially anticipated, and there would be incentives for contractors to finish work sooner than later. Now, that 2020 date, mind you, is much more than the 18 months that they talked about, the year and a half. The contractor would install the net first along the east side of the bridge and then the west side. The Suicide Deterrent Project would be the first large-scale horizontal net installation on a major bridge in the U.S. At 385,000 square feet, it would be almost the size of 7 football fields, suspended 220 feet above the water. The plan called for the net, as we said, extending 20 feet below and 20 feet from the side of the span, modified in certain areas because of the terrain. It would be made of stainless steel, marine-grade cable to stand up to the elements, saltwater environment. It would be gray instead of red to better blend with the water. Caltrans was going to contribute $22 million to the overall project, $7 million from the state mental health services funds, and the Golden Gate Bridge District would contribute $20 million, in addition to $27 million from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which is the regional planning agency for all of the Bay Area counties. In July 2016, there was another stumbling block. Remember, this is you were opening the bids. The low bid for the work came in almost double the construction cost estimate. They opened 2 bids for the work, and the low bid came in at $142 million from a joint venture of Oakland-based Shimmick and Danny's. In September 2016, it was reported the cost could escalate to as much as $198 million. In December 2016, they finally recommended the work go to the Shimmick-Danny joint venture, which bid $142 million. That was the lower bid. But of course, this being contracting, the rival contractor, Chiropoulos, which is Pennsylvania-based American Bridge Company, filed a protest, alleging that the proposal they accepted failed to meet many standards of the project, although Shimmick denied those allegations. So if the committee found the allegations had merit, both companies would have been rejected because they deemed the $174 million proposal too expensive, and this would have reset the entire bid process, possibly delaying the project by at least a year. Now we're up to 2017. It was expected now that the construction would take 4 years and could disrupt traffic at times. 4 years, mind you. Remember, the initial estimate was 18 months. In March 2017, they announced a completion date, January 2021. Do you think that was met? No. In November 2017, it was reported that engineers would have to do more wind testing on a model of the Golden Gate Bridge before the span could be modified for a seismic upgrade and the suicide barrier. The testing performed by a Canadian lab showed the bridge model performed well under a horizontal wind flow of more than 100 miles per hour. But the bridge became unstable when the wind flow was changed by 1 degree. So this whole modeling effort of how all the pieces go together is difficult. By January 2022, there were further delays to the barrier. Now, the estimate for completion was January 2023. Remember, it was originally 18 months, back around 2015. District officials were saying that the delays were the result of construction contractor Shimmick Construction, who wasn't working as quickly as the district would like. And of course, the head of the company said contractors were in discussions with the district about a number of issues that have resulted in delay. This, of course, would add more to the cost. When the Bridge District first put the project out to bid, remember, officials were shocked when the responses were more than double the original estimate of $76 million. The cost was later revised to $198 million and then increased to $211 million after it was delayed until 2023. Near the end, they were estimating the cost would be close to $215 million. Remember I talked about the Big Dig. That had cost overruns of $1.5 billion due to all the problems they ran into. This happens on projects and really should be expected. If you're an engineer, you learn double your time estimate, double your cost estimate, and then, if you're lucky, it will come in on that number. In November 2022, it was reported that the suicide prevention net would cost around $400 million, more than double its original price, what I said, because of the problems sparked by the government agency that manages the span. Now, that was according to the lead contractor, so they're blaming the government. They filed a case in state court alleging that changes and flaws to the government's net design and lack of transparency about deterioration of the bridge's maintenance platform raised the construction price from $142 million to at least $398 million, round up to $400. What's a million here or there? The construction joint venture, Shimmick and Danny's Construction Company, were then sued by a subcontractor, Vigor Works, which claimed it was owed millions of dollars. The joint venture countersued. In the motion, they asked a judge to allow them to also sue the district, which manages the span. The contractors contended in their documents that the district delayed the completion of the project and damaged their reputations by concealing significant information, including excessive deterioration in certain areas of the bridge. According to the joint venture, the deterioration was mainly in the maintenance platforms. These are U-shaped structures known as travelers that are powered by diesel engines and hug the bridge on both sides to give workers access to the bridge's underside and hard-to-reach areas. In August 2023, so we're getting close, it was reported that the new suicide barrier on the Golden Gate Bridge was having a significant effect, even though it wasn't completed. According to statistics released in July 2023 from the Bridge Rail Foundation, there have been 5 confirmed suicide jumps on the bridge in 2023 through June, compared with 22 through all of 2022. Between 2000 and 2019, the bridge averaged between 30 and 40 suicides per year. Now, note that the bridge is not designed for a cushy landing. This is not one of those nets you see under acrobats in the circus. It is designed to inflict a painful, although non-lethal, injury on a jumper. While one function of the net is hindering anyone who does land on it from taking further action, the overriding aim is to deter people from jumping in the first place. Why the barrier seems to be deterring some people despite being unfinished, there are wide sections of the railing with a direct line to the ocean, wasn't clear. Some speculate that the areas of the bridge without a net may be easier for police and the district bridge patrol to keep an eye on, and that some would-be jumpers who see the net may assume it goes completely across. So, the suicide net was finally completed at the end of 2023. There are articles that are in the January headlines post that talk about the completion. So, remember, the first ideas for this started in 2010. They said it would take 18 months to install. They began finding a construction firm in 2015. Construction began around 2017. Remember, it's 18 months. Finally completed in December 2023. One digression related to this. Deterrence and transportation go together. You will very often see them there. You see them whenever you fly. TSA. We talk about the TSA being security theater, but one of the things, and I can say this as someone who works in security, you never know when things are deterred because you don't have any evidence that someone said, wait, there are people inspecting bags, I'm not going to do this. We've never seen the proof that because people have increased antivirus stuff on their systems, people are going to say, I'm not going to start an attack. So we don't know what is deterred from TSA. We only know what they find. Another example of deterrence are the California agricultural inspection stations. I can't tell you how many times I see people complain about the ag stations and how they just wave passengers through. The stations are still a deterrent. People won't pack things that they know might be problems. And the people who are there will stop folks who look like they may be a problem. And these could be folks with moving trailers. These could be folks from out of state. If you're coming from a nearby state, they're not going to stop you. They know that you know the rules and you'll follow the rules. There are numerous bridges in the state where there are either suicide barriers or suicide signs. We've talked about the Golden Gate Bridge. Other examples are the Colorado Street Bridge, which I believe has a barrier, the Cold Springs Tavern Bridge on Route 154, the Coronado Bridge on Route 175, where they're talking about building a barrier, and the Route 118 Bridge, where Route 118 turns near Moore Park. They have all sorts of suicide deterrent signs there. Another example are the speed monitored by air. You really don't know whether there are helicopters out there, but just the signs do cause some people to slow down. And the goal of this is not to stop people who are determined to do the deed, but to stop the casual folks and to get them to think twice. And with this, we need to say, if you are at all thinking about suicide, there is now a national suicide prevention number, 988. Call it if you are thinking about it all. Don't jump off a bridge.
So my wife actually works for Madera County Behavioral Health, and she has some additional notes on 988. Anyone can call for resources to help a family or friend. So basically, it doesn't have to be the person thinking about committing suicide. It could be anyone as a friend, family member. They can also call 988, and it will connect you to your local county's services. So basically, they'll connect you with who you need to speak with.
Thank you on that. And with that, I'll turn to you to talk about one other interesting project on the bridge, which I sort of call the Singing Bridge. I don't know whether you remember about this, Tom.
I do remember the Singing Bridge. In June 2020, it was reported that a recent bicycle path and rail retrofit has resulted in the Golden Gate Bridge sounding like an orange wheezing kazoo. I didn't hear it described like that, but interesting. A spokesman from the Golden Gate Bridge Highway and Transportation District said the sounds stem from a long-planned wind retrofitting. The new musical tones coming from the bridge are known and inevitable phenomenon that stems from our wind retrofit project during very high winds. The wind retrofit project is designed to make the bridge more aerodynamic under high wind conditions and is necessary to ensure the safety and structural integrity of the bridge for generations to come. We knew going into the handrail replacement that the bridge would sing during exceptionally high winds from the west. We are pleased to see the new railing is allowing wind to flow more smoothly across the bridge. Spokesman continued specifically, sound is a result of the fast northwesterly winds passing through the new railings and winds veering on the western side between the two towers as part of an ongoing wind retrofit project. And it has been described by the district as quote-unquote singing, but some local residents had other choice words. I remember the other choice words. Calling it a screeching sound is like torture and saying it caused psychological distress that was impossible to ignore. A little extreme. After the noise became noticeable at the beginning of June, the district put out a statement on June 6 stating that the new musical tones coming from the bridge are a known and inevitable phenomenon that stems from our wind retrofit project during very high winds. Later, the district walked back those comments. District staff spoke with a consultant to discuss plans to study the cause of noise and develop changes to potentially muffle it. In the meantime, they plan to record the sound and compare it to other weather station data to create a baseline record of when and under what condition the noise occurs. Wind retrofit is being performed to ensure the bridge can withstand winds up to 100 miles per hour. It is also required as part of the installation of the bridge's suicide barrier, which at the time was under construction. About 75% of the new railings have been installed and about 10% of the wind fairings. The project's final environmental impact report published in 2010 found the new railings and fairings would not result in any substantial increase in ambient noise compared to forest installation. The environmental impact report was based on expert analysis who conducted multiple tests on a 1/20th scale model of the bridge. The model bridge was constructed of aluminum and plastic, however, and not steel like the actual bridge. In January 2022, it was reported engineers had developed a $450,000 plan to muffle the loud humming noise that had been emanating from the Golden Gate Bridge on windy days. The sound was an unintended result of wind upgrades to the bridge railings in 2020. Residents living in nearby communities such as Sausalito and San Francisco's Presidio were the most affected, but the strange hummings could be heard several miles away. After studying the sound for about a year, the bridge's governing agency recently approved a plan that, as chief engineer said, will significantly reduce and, in very many instances, eliminate the noise. The plan calls for installing thin U-shaped aluminum clips and rubber inserts on the railing pickets along the entire span of the bridge. The bridge district hopes to have the clips installed by the end of 2022, but much of that will depend on how quickly materials can be fabricated. Surveys of the bridge found that noise could reach as high as 100 decibels, which actually is very loud, which is similar to the sound of a jackhammer or garbage truck. Wind tunnel tests conducted by the district have shown that the clips reduce most of the wind noise by 10 to 40 decibels. A 10 decibel reduction results in the sound being half as loud to the human ear. The wind upgrades were installed as part of the ongoing suicide barrier project on the bridge. The bridge wind retrofit was required to allow the bridge the millions of pounds of extra weight from the steel barrier.
And this, I think, shows how what we often think is a very simple project can have really all sorts of little complications that you don't think about till you start getting into the work of the project.
Psychological damage, though.
Well, it was more physiological damage.
Yeah, I could see that, but I don't know. Like you got to be like really up close to be affected by that full 100 decibels. And living in downtown Chicago, noise is ambient no matter what. But I don't know. That's an interesting way to phrase it.
Noise can affect you. I was just listening to, as I go through backed up podcasts, to an episode of 99% Invisible on the city of Lincoln Heights, or maybe Lincoln Park, Ohio, which is outside of Cincinnati. Are you familiar with it at all?
I am.
You are. There is a gun range run by the city on the edge of Lincoln, as a Park or Heights, that you can hear throughout the city, and they are finally getting it closed down. But it has affected the people who have lived there through the entire history of the city. It's a police gun range.
Funny thing, quick aside, like when we go to Jalisco, my wife has been going there her entire life. Like I always thought Jessica would be like very, very used to like ambient background noises. Like if you go to like a small town in like Mexico, it's very loud at all times of the day and night. And the family house is right next to a Ferromex line. So I remember sleeping one night, and I was sleeping pretty soundly, and like a train comes by and it will shake the entire house. Like it's literally 30 feet from us. It never wakes me up. So she'll always wake me up and complain about the train. And I'm like, I don't even notice it because I'm so used to elevated trains. Which is the weirdest thing. But that's kind of like in high school, I kind of grew up with noise like that.
Some late breaking news that came out the week we were recording this podcast, which is right near the anniversary of the Northridge quake, where I live in Northridge. They have started work to do an earthquake retrofit on the Golden Gate Bridge. Nancy Pelosi and other folks in Congress secured $400 million to protect the bridge from seismic threats as part of the infrastructure law that was passed in 2021. It turns out that the Golden Gate Bridge is the only bridge in the state of California that hasn't fully been seismically retrofitted since the Loma Prieta earthquake. The first 3 phases of the Golden Gate seismic retrofit were completed in 2014. This included retrofitting the north and south anchorages and viaducts, which are the little bridges that go over things that were found to be the most vulnerable. It also involved replacing the steel supports and a new foundation that is 10 times stronger. They also put seismic isolation bearings on the top of the bridge so that when the ground starts to shake, the tower doesn't have to drag the whole weight of the bridge. Those retrofits also funded dozens of energy dissipation devices that are now going to be installed to reduce the amount of energy transferred to the bridge in the event of a big earthquake. The next phase of the retrofit is beginning in 2024. This phase will involve retrofitting the suspension bridge itself. This involves replacement of the 100 of floor beams with new bracing. The project won't be complete until 2029. There's not any worries about safety for people on the bridge, but they want to prevent significant damage that might necessitate potentially having to replace the bridge after an earthquake, which of course would close down the bridge for a long time. The retrofit of the suspension portion of the Golden Gate Bridge is beginning later in 2024. The Golden Gate Highway and Transportation District estimates that the impacts to commuters are going to be during overnight hours when the lanes will be temporarily closed for construction. Once it's completed, however, the bridge will be fully protected, at least based on the engineering estimate. I'll note the usual stuff we talk about at this point, which would be namings of segments of the highway or freeway plans for the highway, really don't apply. There are no alternative names for the Golden Gate Bridge unless we misspeak and call it the Golden State Bridge. And, of course, there are no freeway plans for the bridge beyond what it is. It's already limited access.
So, next time on California Highways Route by Route, we pick up with Route 1 in Marin County and continue through the Redwoods.
For more information, as always, visit the pages on US 101 over on cahighways.org. In the middle of the US 101 page, I do have a section on the Golden Gate Bridge. We have a number of Gribble Nation blogs on the subject, one on the original alignment of Route 1 in San Francisco, another on the legislative gaps of Route 1 and US 101, namely the Golden Gate Bridge. And I'll work in a whole batch of additional links, as you see I do, on the show page at caroutebyroute.org.
As always, information on the episode is available on our website, caroutebyroute.org, where you can leave us comments on the episode. This episode is also available on our anchor.fm home, anchor.fm/CA Route by Route. Join us as we continue to explore California highways route by route.
This episode was written by Daniel Fagan and Tom Fear, edited and produced by Daniel Fagan. Our opening theme is I Like to Be by the Seaside by John H. Glover Kind. If you have an opening theme that you think might be good for our show or know how to clear a theme, please contact me and we can talk to you. I've explored, there's actually a song that Al Jolson sings called Golden Gate that talks about the Golden Gate Bridge and mentions the Lincoln Highway. I'd love to be able to use that as a theme, but I have no idea how much it would cost to clear it. Episodes are recorded using freeconferencecall.com, and this podcast is a product of California Highways at cahighways.org and Gribble Nation at gribblnation.org. And with that, Tom, any closing thoughts on the Golden Gate Bridge?
I mean, really, this is one of the probably signature bridges in the United States. There's a reason people go see it. It's one of the most aesthetically pleasing designs that's out there, and it's really held up to the test of time. Even as a through facility, there's really not much that's substandard to it. I mean, it's not like interstate standard, but it's enough to get people to and from San Francisco to Marin County. It's kind of neat. I always thought that like something that old really held up through the times and kind of adapted to them. We didn't even really get a chance to even talk about like the movable barrier that's in the center line that they kind of swap around on the fly to adjust for 3 lanes of traffic for like northbound at night.
You want to describe what that is? It wasn't described simply because it's not a current project on the bridge.
Yeah, it's basically the movable barrier is a structure in the center of the Golden Gate Bridge that it's kind of like a rubber, it's not concrete, it's like this rubber barrier material where a machine will go through and it will sort the movable barrier from one side of the structure to the other. So the idea is in the morning, it will provide 3 lanes of traffic southbound into San Francisco, and at night, 3 lanes of northbound traffic going into Marin County. It's very fast too. I've seen it. I was on the bridge running one morning when it actually was out. It was very neat to see. It probably took them like a couple minutes to get across the bridge.
I always find the engineering in the bridge interesting. There was one notion that mentioned in the show, which is that they cannot replace the steel cables in the bridge. The minute you cut one, that's what supports the entire bridge, is all on those cables, which means that we have a bridge that is approximately 90 years old, a little, maybe 85. It was built in 37, right? It's 24 right now. So we're coming up on 100 years on the bridge. And these are the original steel cables, and it's pretty amazing. They have held up that long. Most of your surfacing on a highway doesn't last that long. And I don't know the engineering lifetime for those cables, but I'd imagine they built it to last 200 years. And that's just sort of amazing when you think about it.
Yeah, they don't build bridges with lifespans like that in mind nowadays.
And they built a few other suspension bridges in California, but I don't think there's anything that's like that.
No, not even the western side of the Bay Bridge would probably be the closest thing. But I mean, there's like really just no comparison. It was incredibly over-engineered for its time. Like, think about it. You're going from a car ferry system to this bridge that lasts for basically a century and probably will last another after that. It's just the amount of thought and engineering skill that had to go into that is in the 1930s is pretty amazing. Like, this is not like a very good economic time period either, and it still was constructed to a really high standard.
Again, I will recommend the episode of the History Channel on the engineering competition between the Golden Gate Bridge and the Oakland Bay Bridge, the old one. Really, really interesting, and you'll learn a lot of facts on the bridge. And with that, we will end this podcast. Next time, we will start our journey north from the Headlands in the Marin County and the Waldo Tunnel, which is now the Robin Williams Rainbow Tunnel. And we'll work our way up the coast for Route 1 and finish off Route 1 over the next 2 or 3 episodes. We will look forward to your joining us then, and remember to tell your friends about this podcast, like it, or whatever mechanism you use in your podcatcher. I'm incredibly old-fashioned. I still use an iPod Classic to listen to my podcasts. So please tell your friends about this podcast, and we'll talk to you next time.